Lesson 44, 8-4, solving using square roots. Square root is one of the two factors of a number. If a squared equals b, then a is the square root of b. Square root of 144 is plus or negative 12. Reason being is when you have the square root of 44, that's saying basically what number times what number would give you 144, and it has to be the same number. Hence a squared. So we'd have negative 12 squared. Negative 12 times negative 12 would give us 144. Also, 12 times 12 is 144. Hence why we have to say plus a negative 12. You can write it as negative 12 and 12, or you can just write this plus a negative 12. That's covering the positive and the negative end. If you know what 144 is talking about, for instance, if this was an area of a room, and it's a square, the area is a perfect square, or a square room, your dimensions would be 12 by 12. Therefore, you would not put plus a negative 12 as your answer, or negative 12 as an answer. You just have 12, only when you know what's going on here. So if we look down here, x squared, we do not know what x squared is talking about. In order to get rid of a square, we use a square root. Remember, x squared is saying x times x. So when you take the square root of that, you're going to be left with x, which is your whole purpose, is to solve the equation here. So square root both sides. What you do to one side, you do to the other. You balance your equation. When you take the square root of 121, you'd wind up with x equals plus a negative 11. This is how you can write the answer, or you can write it as 11 and negative 11. Same concept over here. You have n squared equals 74. To get rid of a square, we're going to square root both sides. And when we take the square root of 74, you'd notice that you'd get an irrational number. So we're going to round to 3 decimal places here, and we wind up with n equals plus a negative 8.602. Jumping down to C, you notice again m is not by itself. It is being squared, and it is being multiplied by 3. So the first thing that you need to do is get rid of that 3. In order to get rid of 3, you have to do the inverse operations. So in this case, we should divide both sides by 3. When you divide both sides by 3, on one side you'll be left with m squared. The other side you'll be left with 64. Now you're back up to what you did in A and B. In order to get rid of a square, we square root both sides. When you square root both sides, this here is m times m, so we are left with m, and then we think, what is the square root of 64? We should wind up with plus a negative 8. Again, you can write that as 8, and negative 8, much quicker way, is plus a negative here. In D, get r alone. R is being squared, and it also has a negative sign. Remember, this negative sign, we can actually put a 1 there, so that's really saying negative 1r squared. Negative 1 is multiplying by r. So in order to get rid of the negative 1, we need to divide both sides by a negative. When you divide both sides by a negative, you are left with r squared. And over here, we have negative 34 divided by negative 1. We get a positive 34. To get r alone, again, square root both sides. Do your computation, and you are left with r equals plus a negative 5.831. E, coming back to solving equations here. In this E and F, if you look at the ones from C and D above, here we actually are having a number either added or subtracted. So we need to get rid of the addition and subtraction first. To get rid of plus 5, you need to subtract 5 from both sides. When you subtract 5 from both sides, you wind up with 3x squared equals 202. Need to get rid of our 3 here. Next thing we should do is divide both sides by 3. When you divide both sides by 3, you wind up with x squared equals 67 1/3. Now what I did here is I am actually combining 2 steps. I know the next step after I divide both sides by 3, I have x squared left. So I took the square root of both sides right away. The square root of 67 1/3 is x equals plus or negative 8.206. I want you to go ahead and pause the video right now and give F a shot. All right, now that you're back, this is what the first step that you should have done. Add 18 to both sides. You wind up with 9p squared equals 320. Divide by 9 on both sides. You're left with p squared equals 35 5/9. Take the square root to get rid of a square, and you're left with p equals plus or negative 5.963. On to our last two examples. Notice in G, what is being squared is this binomial. You have x plus 4, and that is being squared. Remember, x plus 4 squared is really saying x plus 4 times x plus 4. To get rid of a square, you take the square root. Now, when we take the square root of both sides, normally what you would have is if you had, let's say, for instance, 64 in here, it'd be 8 by 8. This is saying x plus 4 times x plus 4, so we wind up with x plus 4 on one side equals the square root of 77 is plus or negative 8.775. We need to get x by itself. Therefore, we need to subtract both sides by 4. Now, when you subtract both sides by 4, here's what the meaning is. So, you have x plus 4 equals a positive 8.775, because this is plus a negative, so I'm covering the positive piece. It is also saying x plus 4 equals negative 8.775. Here's the positive, here's the negative. You need to subtract by 4 in both equations here. So when you subtract by 4 in both equations, you have a positive 8.775 minus 4 and a negative 8.775 minus 4. You would wind up with a positive 4.775 and a negative 12.775. So you'd actually wind up with two answers. In H, I want you to go ahead, give that a shot, pause the video, and then come back. All right, our first step here, we should have added 7. When you add 7, here's what you should wind up with, 2 parentheses x plus 3 squared equals 194. The next step, you should have divided by 2, because this is multiplying by 2. When we divide by 2, we wound up with x plus 3 squared equals 97. The next step that you would want to do is get rid of the square, so we'd put in our square roots. After we square root both sides, we wind up with x plus 3 equals plus a negative 9.849. So I subtracted by 3 to both sides. Now, I didn't write it out like I did over here. I just went ahead and shortcut. You can decide which way you like better. Maybe it's better for you to write both out. I just know that I need to subtract 3 from a positive 9.849. So when I subtract that from my positive 9.849, I wind up with 6.849. Now, I have to cover the negative end like I did over here. Negative 9.849 minus 3, I wind up with negative 12.849. This concludes our lesson 44, 8-4, solving using square roots.